Hello painters, welcome to week 3 of Watercolours with Caroline. We are going to paint a surfer at sunset. The picture taken by Denise McQuillan, our lovely Denise, of a beach in California. It's a beautiful sunset. Try and use a bigger bit of paper if you can, because you can really get those sunset colours going on a sort of 8 by 10 piece of paper. So get your paints ready, lots of yellows and oranges and gorgeous sunset colours. And let's get painting. Okay, so I'm going to get my pencil, maybe my red pencil here. And I want to circle a big area that you need to keep white when we do the first wash. Now you're going to add a little bit of yellow, a little bit of very pale yellow here and orange, but this big cloudy area here, we're going to put this blue in second when the first layer is dry, and this little bit of blue up here as well. But this bit is not so worrying because it's a darker blue, but this bit needs to be kept white in the first layer. If you look at these yellow clouds here, these ones, they are very pale yellow, and we need to make sure that you use a very diluted wash here so that the white paper can really shine through and it's not thick yellow. Another place that we need to keep white at the moment when we start is this bit of area here where we're going to put the blue in for the ripples in the sand. All the rest of it we're going to do with a nice big wash at the start. We'll start with pale yellow here, and this is almost white here, so we'll try and leave a little bit of that white, pale yellow, and then we're going to mix the yellow and the red and make some orange, and along the base here going to mix some yellow and rose and make some darker orange. And then we're going to mix some Quinacridone Rose and Phthalo Blue to make some of the purple in here. And we'll also put the yellow and orange down here. Now, a lot of this darker purple here and here can be put in with the second layer. So you don't have to go dark purple in the first layer, or you could get like a lot of gray happening. So just try and remember all this area where the blue is going to go, and it's going to be a pale phthalo blue, needs to be left white in our first layer. So keep that in your mind as we start. And quite often when you're doing a deep sunset like this in watercolor, we actually go a little bit paler in watercolor, because if you try and go too deep, it looks a bit opaque and garish. And watercolor needs to have that more watery look. So we deliberately go a little bit lighter and not so intense. Doesn't mean to say you can't go intense if you want to, but it can lead to a very opaque look. So I'm going to have my little pad of cheap paper here just to test any colors. And my nice new 3/4 inch silver black velvet flat brush, they're quite good for just wetting down the paper. So if you've got a number 10 brush or a soft flat brush, we're going to make sure we get the whole paper wet to start with. So back and forth, dip in the water, back and forth, dip in the water. Don't try and wet it with a dry brush. Dip in the water. Make sure we get it all. The first layer is going to be all wet in wet, quite light. We can go darker with the second layer. And then I'm going to tip it because I want to see, are there any dry patches here? Yeah, there's a little dry patch there. And I'm going to go over everything a second time. And just make sure I've got everything nice and wet. And I've got my Kleenex. I want to make sure I don't have too many wet bits around the edge that could do a back run into the painting. And I think that's good. And I want to have my reference photo really handy so I don't forget where to put my colors and where to leave my white space for the blue and everything else. And And then I'm going to get my yellow ready. And the reason I don't get my colors ready beforehand is, first of all, I don't want my brush to have any color in it. Even if I use a different one, I might pick up the wrong one by mistake. Second is I want this water to soak into the paper, and I won't be too impatient if I go and get my paints ready. Now I'm going to use my number 10 brush for my first wash, or an 8 is fine. And grab a cleaner palette, and I want to get my Azo Yellow. And I'm going to use it fairly diluted for some of the sky. I want to mix my Azo Yellow with some Cadmium Red to get an orange. I might make a couple of oranges. That one was quite pale, and I might make one that's a bit deeper. Same colors, the Cadmium Red and the Azo Yellow, or Cadmium Yellow if you like. Get those ones. Now I also want to do one with the Quinacridone Rose and the Azo Yellow, so it's a more of a rosy red, and have lots of mixes here. I'm going to grab a bit of rose. You can see it's much more rosy than the other orange. I'll make it quite rosy because if I have a bit of yellow underneath, it'll still go orange. And the last thing I want is a nice transparent lilac, and that's why I'm using the Phthalo Blue, because I want a nice transparent lilac. I could use any of the other blues, but if I use the ultramarine, it will be much less transparent. And when you have a lot of layers, you want to avoid the more opaque colors or the granulating colors. So I'm going to mix the Quinacridone Rose with that. Both of them are transparent. The Phthalo Blue and the Rose are transparent, so they'll give me lovely, lovely transparent colors. And then I don't run the risk of having a muddy sky in any way. Right, now I want to check my paper. It's starting to dry at the top. So I've got a second bowl of water, and I kept my brush clean. And I just want to make sure, and there's no harm in wetting a big piece of paper twice. The first piece of paper penetrates, the first water wash penetrates the paper, gets it wet and ready to accept more water, and then you can add a bit more water to wet it up again to make sure that your paint flows well. If you're using 140-pound cotton, it will absorb a lot of water, and it will take a few minutes to absorb it. So you want to make sure you get it not dripping. You don't want, if you lift it up and anything drips off, that's too wet. All my water's staying in place. It's not trickling down the paper or anything like that. So my number 10 brush, remember I want to leave that big piece of blue in the middle. And I've just got the Azo Yellow on my brush by itself, and I want to, and I'm not worrying about what's sky and what's ocean at this point. I'm just going to put some of that Azo Yellow in close to the horizon and a little bit on the ocean. And also go behind your rocks that are going to be silhouetted. Otherwise you're going to get everything kind of stopping at the edge, which will look very strange. There's a few little yellow clouds coming in, very thin ones. I'm lifting my brush right up and using the point, bringing those in, and then got to leave this great big bit of area for blue. So I want to go up here. Now, a slightly different way I'm using my brush. When I was down here, I had my brush lifted up using the point. Now I'm going to these more fluffy clouds. I'm kind of laying my brush down a little bit, and I'm kind of swishing it a little bit more for these fluffy clouds. I want to put the yellow on first, and then I'm going to come over with the orange. Doesn't matter if it's not exactly like the photo, we're just going to use it as a helpful guide. And also down here in the water, I'm looking, and very near the surfer, there's quite a lot of yellow. Again, go right over your surfer, yeah, you know, surfer, so that you can put him on top of this and it's not going to look as strange. And we want some blue in the middle by the surface, so we're going to leave a little bit there for the blue. And then we're going to come along here. Now we're going to come along with orange now. I'm going to go to the first orange that I mixed. And I'm going to put some of that along the horizon here. And some in the clouds up here. Again, I'm sort of swishing with my brush for the clouds up here. I definitely want some orange in the sand and the ocean coming over here. And now I want to switch to the darker orange. This is where I added more cadmium red to the orange. And I'm going to go a little bolder. If I want the thin clouds, I use the point of the brush. And if I want them a bit more fluffy, I lay my brush sort of on its side. Let's equate. These thin ones are like doing eyeliner, and then these ones are like doing blusher. If you wear makeup, give you a little guide there. And down near the horizon, there's a very orange glow too, so I want to put some of that in. See, we're just building up. The paper's wet, the paint is wet. We can do quite a lot of building here. And thinking, you don't have to rush in. Close to the edge here, we're going to have quite a purple shadow when we get here, but we're going to put in a bit more orange. And now I'm going to the rosy orange, the one that is rose and yellow. And I'm going to put some rose in here. Up here, it's quite rosy up here. These are the blushy, fluffy ones. I've got to leave a little space for some blue here. Mustn't forget the blue. And a bit more rosy color. And it's quite pretty along the horizon, so I'm going to add a little bit of rose along the horizon, and especially over this side where it's quite dark. Bring a bit more rose in. Putting your color where your shadows are going to be is also going to make your shadows darker, easier to darken. And along the shore here. And remember, if we don't get enough color, we can do more color in a second layer. That's fine. We're not going to lose out. A little bit of rose coming through here. A little bit coming along the waves, and we can definitely put more in the waves later if we want to. But we want some blue in the waves too. Now, one thing I like to use when I'm doing these fluffy clouds, I like to use a dry, soft brush. This is my Haki brush, the Chinese one. I think it's made of goat hair. And sometimes I just like to wisp that paint a little bit with the dry brush to soften up those clouds just a little bit. I don't need to soften up the reflections. They're quite hard in the sand. Now we've got one last part to put on before we go to the second layer, and that's a little bit of the purple. And I mixed quite a blue purple here. I want to add a bit more rose to that. I want the first layer to be more rosy and the second layer to be more bluey. I've just added a bit more rose to that purple, which was Phthalo Blue and Quinacridone Rose. And I want to put in some of those purpley clouds, the dusk, you know, the night coming in. A little bit up here. They will look very dark at the moment, but when we get all the darks in, they will be okay. We don't want to do too much right now, just a little bit. And again, I'm going to get my fluffer brush and just fluff the edges of those around a little bit to soften them. And the water will do some softening too. And there's a few, tip of the brush, lifting my brush up using just the tip, there's a few coming through here. And that is enough for the first layer. We can do more in another layer, but you don't want to overdo it. I've got a great big piece of space here for the blue, and I've got space down here for the blue and in the water. So this has to be perfectly dry before I do the blue. And the other thing I need to do is all of this wet and wet that's happening needs to happen before I actually dry the paper. I just want it to all soften and blend in. So I'm going to take my fluffy brush again. I'm just going to ease that purple cloud across a little bit so it's more fluffy. There's a little bit of lilac here, and I'm going to take this hockey brush, dip it. I've just dipped it in my lilac, and I'm just going to see if I can gently with just the tips of that brush add a few little wisps of lilac. There we go. Being really, really gentle. Just popping those in. I'm going to clean and dry that brush. I have some other fluffy brushes, so I'll be using them again probably for the second layer. And I'm going to let that soak in while you work on yours. And I'll use the hairdryer when it's looking like it's done its thing. So I'll let you just work on yours. Go slowly, there's no rush. If you've wetted your paper properly, it should be wet for quite a while. Okay, mine is mostly around the edges drying, so I'm going to mute my microphone even though I've been very quiet, and I'm going to use my hairdryer so I'm ready to do the next stage. So I'm just muting now. So it's quite a big piece of paper, so it took quite a while to get it dry, but it is dry. And I'm also going to get some clean water from my other desk. There, so that the reason for getting some very clean water is for the second wetting of the sky. You don't want any watermarks that have a little bit of paint in them, because they'll really show up and stain your paper. And when we do the second wetting, we're just going to wet down to the completely straight horizon line so that we can work on the sky separately from the sand. It gives us a bit more working time, and we can work on the sand while the sky is blending. And you might wonder why I've decided to use phthalo blue in the sky and the ocean rather than cerulean blue or something like I usually do. And that is because I want it to be very, very transparent. And phthalo blue is a transparent color. And all we need to do is just remember to dilute it enough so that it's not overpowering. And I will demonstrate that on my piece of paper I have here. Don't use your clean water, Caroline, or you will contaminate it. So I'm going to use my other water, and I'm going to get some phthalo blue on my palette. So this is phthalo blue. Beautiful, beautiful, intense, transparent color. And if I'm using phthalo blue as it comes, just, dilute it a little bit, it's pretty dark. We don't want a sky or anything that's that dark. But if I take a lot of water, and I dilute that phthalo blue down, we have something that's closer to a cerulean or a lovely sky blue. and it's very transparent. It's staining, and it will stay there if we re-wet another layer. So this is a beautiful color for the evening sky. The evening sky and ocean, if you ever look at it, has that turquoisey look. The yellow of the evening sun kind of blends the colors to make a much more turquoisey sky. So that's another good reason to use the phthalo blue. But I'm going to go underneath with the cerulean just to compare. So I'm going to, again, same thing, I'm going to put the cerulean here thick as it comes, sort of just with a bit of water. That's quite thick. Then I'm going to dilute it down and paint it here. And you can see that it is very, very similar to the phthalo blue. The only thing is that the cerulean is granulating and much more opaque. So as it dries, it will granulate a little bit. It'll lift easily. If you put any water on it or other layers, it won't stain as much. It won't be as transparent. So you could definitely use cerulean, but I think phthalo is just the slightly better choice if you have it. But if you don't, use cerulean. It's a coolish blue. Both of them make a lovely purple because they're cool. But you will see as the cerulean starts to dry that it will granulate a little bit, whereas the phthalo will stay fairly flat. And look at the difference. The other reason to use it in this painting, because I like a limited palette, is that if you mix the phthalo with the Quinacridone Rose and the other colours, it's going to make a beautiful, intense, transparent dark, not an opaque, muddy dark. So it's another reason to use it. You can see its intensity is going to give you beautiful, dark silhouette colours. Now, always a reason to choose what you choose. Right, let's get my brush nice and clean. I think a lot of you are maybe close to finishing the first layer. So I'm going to work on the second layer and get my 3/4 inch brush again. I'm just going to wet the sky. I'm just going to work on the sky to start with. Oh, that's a bit too zoomed in. Let's keep it there. So again, because I've dried everything, nothing should lift as I wet for the second time. Go right over where your silhouette's going to be, otherwise you're going to get a weird line there. You have to kind of treat the silhouettes as if they don't exist when you're doing these layers. Just go right over the top of them, don't worry about them. Pretend they're not there. Now I'm going to tip, make sure that my sky is all wet down to that straight horizon. And then I'm going to make sure that I diluted my blue to the right dilution while I was playing around with it. Yep, it's fine. I might mix just a little bit more. So I've got plenty. I'm going to still stick with my number 10 brush. Did I say that? Can't remember if I said that. That's good. And the first thing I want to do is put in the blue sky in the middle here. And I don't just want a big blue blob in the middle. What I want to have is that blue going up into those wispy clouds up here, into these wispy clouds. I'm going to leave some clouds at the side. Have to be very careful when it hits the yellow because you'll get green if you're not too careful. And I'm going to take it along here. In here a little bit. I've dried off my brush and I'm going to just dry up that paint a little bit. I don't want it quite that wet. So I'm drying my brush off. Got my little sponge here, drying it off. And I'm going to control that paint a little bit with it so it's not too wet. And now I'm going to, that pinky purple that I made, I'm going to take a little bit of that on my brush. And I'm going to mix it with that little bit of blue that I have here. So I have a purpley blue. And I'm going to put a little bit of that higher up. And up here. Go into the more pinky purple. More pinky one. A little bit of that. To be very, very, very soft with it. Soft, and don't forget you've got a soft brush if you want to soften it up a little bit. Move it around a little bit. Now up the top, near the top clouds, there's a little bit more blue up there too. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that blue and I'm going to put it up here. Again, gently easing it between those clouds that I have up here. And then I'm going to get more purple because I want to have those purple clouds up there. And this is a purple that's mixed with a bit more blue. I'm going to add a bit more purple cloud here, a bit more dramatic. Here and along here. And I've got my fluffy brush to just ease those in, make them very, very soft. The thing with the layers too is it gives the sky some dimension. Now, if you think about the sky, these clouds are all at different elevations. They're not all at the same height in the sky. And when you put layers on your painting, you give that illusion of low cloud, high cloud, and it gives it a much more realistic look. So now I've mixed another purple that's got less water. So I grabbed a little bit of rose and I grabbed a little bit of phthalo blue and no water. I didn't grab any water, so it's not very watery because that's going to make it more intense. And I want to have a little bit more intense color up here. I'm putting this on, streaking it in here a little bit, and then I'm going to use my soft brush to soften it all in, fluff it all around the sky. A little bit darker here. Again, soft brush. Now my paper's starting to dry up quite a bit, so the water's not going to move this paint around very much. That's why I really need my soft brush to move it around. A little bit down here. My soft brush. And now the paper's really starting to dry quite a bit. So I won't be able to do too much more without getting some horrible backgrounds and things on the paper. Now I have got quite a bit of blue coming down into yellow here that I didn't really want. I've lost my nice light yellow there. That's just too bad for me. I wasn't focused. That's what happens when you talk and paint. You're not always focused. What I could try and do afterwards, when this is dry, I could try and lift out a bit of cloud, but I could just not even worry about it and say, well, this one isn't This one isn't going to have that light cloud there. Too bad. And now that the paper's starting to dry, I can't do any more to the sky at the moment. I would have to wait for this to dry before I add any more. What I might do is when this is all dry and we've done this bit down here, I might add a little bit more orange in here, or I might not. I might just say it's good enough. One other orange I could use is transparent orange. I didn't put it on the menu because I didn't know if you had one, but transparent orange is a beautiful, beautiful transparent. The clue's in the name, orange. Very, very intense. And I don't know if mine's too, that'll probably still take some. I'm just going to use a little bit of that transparent orange. I think it's still, it's very strong. I'm going to add a little bit. I think it's going to be okay. And a little bit along the horizon. And again, I'm going to use my fluffy brush to just soften that in. There, that's enough. If I do any more, I'm really going to wreck the sky. I got to stop and let it do its thing. Now, because we left the ocean dry, I can work on the ocean without having to go to the hairdryer or worry about the sky. It can just do its thing and soak into the paper. So the first thing we're going to do on the ocean part is to put the blue in, but on dry paper. The reason being is that we have these ripples in the sand, these wet ripples, and we can control the blue much better if it's on dry paper, getting these horizontal ripples here. And we can just do like a very light wash across the ocean here with, you know, just a wet brush. And again, working really, really slowly so that we have time to think. And one of the reasons I lost some of my light here is my blue was a bit too wet when I put it on. It could have been less wet and then it would have stayed where I put it. But sometimes you make that mistake and when it's all finished you like it anyway. I'm pretty much of the opinion that you just get what you get. They're all different and you don't fuss. Nobody else knows what you were aiming for. Now I'm going to use my brand new lovely 3/4 inch brush to sort of do those, try doing those horizontal ripples with the tip of the brush. I'm going to practice first. I'm going to get, now again, not too wet a paint. I've got to be very careful my paint's not too wet. And I can use the tip of this brush to get some nice thin horizontal lines for the beach area. So that's what I'm going to try. And again, the paint cannot be too wet if you want to control it. I'm not going to wet the paper. And again, not too thick. Has to be well diluted. I'm going to tap my flat brush on both sides and make sure I have a lovely sharp edge to it. And that's it. That's, if you get a really good flat brush, you should be able to get a super, super sharp edge on it that you can get very thin lines with. Oh, I'm going to start. I'm holding my breath. I'm going to start with some of the bigger lines close to the surfer, going in the direction that the photo shows, and I'm going to go right over him. And I'm barely touching the paper just with the tip of that brush. And I put a few pencil lines on there to help me with the direction of these sort of ridges in the sand. Now, if you don't go right through his legs, you're going to get weird lines that come up to his legs and kind of stop. I'm going to dilute my blue a little bit more. Go grab a bit of water. I don't want it too strong. Drying my brush off, grabbing a little bit more diluted paint, and I'm going to keep going with less color, less paint on my brush. Of course, as the ripples get further away, they get smaller and smaller and closer together until you can barely see the divisions. That gives you a sense of perspective. I'm kind of connecting a lot of the lines as I get further away. And it's another reason to dilute your paint a little bit so that it's not as strong as you get further away. And as you come up close, you want to be a little bit more cautious of the pattern and how far apart those lines are. So I'm going to dilute this even more, a little bit more water with it, because the ocean is very, very light. Again, take it right through the surfer. Don't worry about the dark parts that we're going to put on the ocean. Take it up to the horizon line. Don't worry about the orange that you have underneath. That's why we're using a transparent phthalo blue, because you will see the orange and everything through it. It'll all shine through. A little dulled down, but it will still show through. I've got most of my blue on. And then I can think about putting a little bit more color on here too. And I'll let the blue dry, and I'll probably put a little bit more color here too when it's dry. A little bit more warm orangey yellow maybe. There's a little bit more blue there. Just looking at the picture. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly like the picture. Just use the picture to help you get stuff kind of where you think it should be. Now, in the corner here is a very kind of a dark, almost brownish purple. So let's go to this one, which is a very bright purple. Clean that brush up. Go back to my number 10 round for a moment. So we have this bright purple that is the Phthalo Blue and the Quinacridone Rose. That makes a beautiful, beautiful bright purple. Now, if we want to get it a little bit more brown, we can add some of the Cadmium Red. It'll make it more brown, maybe a little bit more of the blue. It'll make it a little bit more murky, a little bit more opaque, but it's not going to be a large part of our background. It's going to be a dark corner. So I'm going to test that on my paper. And that's quite a nice grey purple. The cadmium red is an orangey red, so it will be like adding orange and blue, which makes a grey. The rose keeps it a little bit warm. So I think that's a fairly good colour for that corner. And I'm going to wet that corner a little bit. Take that dark colour and I'm going to bring it into the wet so I don't have a hard edge to it. We're going to have some very dark reflections and some hard edges coming out, so don't worry too much about that. And I'm probably going to go darker with another layer, because once you get the darks in, you're going to see that you need a bit more dark. And I want a bit more orange. I'm just mixing up a little bit more rose and Azo Yellow. A little bit more rose. And I want to take some more orange in here too. Just mixing wet in wet with the dark that I've just put there. Now I've cleaned my brush, I've dried my brush on my sponge, and I'm going to use that clean dry brush to pull out some of these edges so that I have some softer edges there. And time to switch to a smaller brush. Let's switch to my number 6. And with my number 6 brush, I'm going to start adding a bit more orange to the foreground. Now, if I was to do this painting 3 or 4 times, which I will have done by the time I've finished this, I would eventually probably put a bit more colour in at the beginning, because I would be more familiar with where I wanted the colour to go. But at this point, after only 1 or 2 paintings, I'm not that sure. And I want to take it slowly and add the colour slowly. So I've got all these sort of white patches in here, and with a wet brush and a little bit of orange or pinky orange, I can go into those white patches and I can add a little bit of colour. And I wash those in with a wet brush. And let's grab some, I've got some just yellow on my brush, no orange. I'm going to take a little bit of yellow in between some of those. Have a bit more colour. I'm going to grab some more orange on my brush. And blend those streaks of colour just gently, and tip of my number 6 brush, not too much water. And yes, you could do this wet in wet. And like I said, if you've done 3 or 4 of these and you've become very familiar with where the colours go, then you could start with a lot of wet in wet putting this in. Now I'm going to a very dry brush now. My brush is almost dry. And if I just drag, get a little bit more reddy orange. If I just drag that dry brush over this part here, I'm going to get that kind of broken look that you get on the water. The texture of the paper will give me that look. I'm just pulling a little bit. Now, if I'm going over the blue, the phthalo blue, I want to use a more rosy color because rose over the blue is going to be lovely. It's much more compatible and will make more of a pinky color rather than a gray. So I'm going to add a little bit of rose to some of this. And now I have a very, very dry brush to add some of these highlights. And if at any point you feel that your dry brush is too dry, you can just take your wet brush and you can ease some of them in with a slightly wet brush if you don't want it quite that intense. Going back to my pinky orange, just adding a little bit more pinky orange in the foreground here. And by now my sky is almost dry. So it's a good time to stop and go to the hairdryer and make sure everything's dry, because I can add more with another layer, but if I keep working on something that's wet, like I would really like to add a little bit more color along the horizon, but the sky is just slightly damp and that would not work. I'd get a great big background, a big cauliflower if I do that. So I'm going to let you keep working on your foreground, on your waves, and I'm going to dry mine thoroughly again. I've got a little bit of something, yeah, a little bit of dust in the sky that I can blow off with the hairdryer. So turning my sound off. So mine's dry, ready for next thing, some of the darks, so that we really have that contrast. You can make more decisions about whether you need stronger color once you've got the darks in, because it will make all of the lighter colors look much lighter. And of course this is all going to be silhouetted here, all of this area. I don't have to worry about how that looks. And the very last thing we want to put in is the surfer, mainly because probably the majority of us are right hand dominant, so we'd smudge him if we put him in now. And I think he's going to be the one that you need to pay most attention to painting carefully, so we'll put him in last. It'll be our last little thing we put in. We're going to start, when we do the darks, we're going to start over here with this big area, and then the reflection, and then some of the streaks in the waves, and some of the little bits on the shore, and very, very last thing will be the surfer and his reflection. Now, when you're painting this great big area with dark paint, go slowly, because if you go too fast, it's going to be a light gray. It won't be a nice dark color because you'll spread your paint out too much. Your paint needs to be nice and liquid. Your brush needs to be an adequate size, size 6 for this, and maybe a size 2 for this little bit down here. But you need to make sure you get a lot of paint on there, or it's going to be really, really light and grey rather than black. Now, I don't know if you can see, now my paint is drying, but you might be able to see that the cerulean blue has granulated. You have all that granulation in the cerulean blue, whereas the phthalo blue has not. It's got a big water bloom here because this is dollar store paper. It's not very good, but there is a distinct difference in how they look when they're dry, and I prefer for this kind of painting the transparent look. Right, let's zoom out a little bit again. We're going to work on the rocks first. I'll bring those down, and we need to make a nice dark mix using the colours that we've used. Like, we don't need to be adding too many colours to this. I find that Payne's grey will get your colours nice and dark and add that good touch of grey if you have it. If you don't, just add a bit more blue. So let's grab this one. So we're going to use the Phthalo Blue and the Quinacridone Rose, which makes a lovely deep purple. And then we're going to add some Azo Yellow because that will grey up the purple, and some Payne's grey to really get it grey. And I need to use a great big brush to mix up. I need a lot of dark paint. We're going to use a lot. So first of all, I'm going to put a bit of water in here, and then I'm going to get a lot of Phthalo Blue. We're not making just a little bit now. We want plenty of dark paint and lots of pigment, but your pigment shouldn't be dry. Look, it should run around your tray. It should be able to come off your brush easily, but we need a lot of it and nice and intense. So now I'm adding the Quinacridone Rose to get a really deep purple. A little bit more. Lovely deep purple. Now if you want a gorgeous purple, that Phthalo Blue and Quinacridone Rose, look at that. Look at that purple. Just beautiful. But we want it a bit darker than that. That's not dark enough for our silhouette. So I'm going to take a little bit of Azo Yellow to grey it down. We've got our three primaries now. We've got our red, yellow and blue. And then Payne's grey to take it down even further, darken it up. And this all keeps it fairly transparent. So we have a transparent dark rather than a thick, opaque, muddy dark. We've used a lot of transparent colours. Now let's try that out and see how dark that is. Not very dark. I need a bit more pigment. It's still quite, you wouldn't think, would you, looking at that big puddle? It's still quite light. I need more pigment. So that just means I've got to add more of everything. Bit more Phthalo Blue. No more water, just more pigment. Also, Quinacridone Magenta is a great one. You don't have to use the rose, you can use the magenta. That's a really good one for making a dark. That's also transparent. I'm going to grab a bit of that. No more water, a bit more yellow. And finally a bit more Payne's grey. And of course you could use black, but it really goes dead when it dries. It goes very flat and dead, whereas all of these colours are already in your painting and they're going to be much more lively colours. Yeah, that's darker. See how much darker that is? I didn't add more water, I just added more pigment until I got it dark enough. But it still has got to be wet enough that your brush can be loaded with it. They say it should be like cream, like a consistency. So you need a big puddle. It needs to be able to move around on your palette. And I'm going to use, let me think about size, my 8 brush, I think. I'm going to have my number 4 brush in my hand, because for little edges, I'm going to need my little tiny brush for little edges. But for big spaces and getting the paint on, I need a bigger brush. So I think my number 8 is a good size. And I need to make sure I roll this brush, roll it in this paint until this brush has got so much paint on it, it's absolutely full. We don't want to just dip the tip in or just put a little bit of the brush in. We need to fill it right up with paint. And it needs to flow off of your brush. So I'm going to start at the tip of this rock face here. I'm going to make sure I get a nice hard edge on the outside of the rock face, get the rocky shapes that are on there. But I need to be pulling my paint down as I paint. I can't just do an edge, otherwise I'm going to get a line. You'll get brush strokes and you'll get a line there. So I get to about here. I keep loading my brush. You can't paint with a brush half full of paint. It has to be well loaded. That area, I'm pulling this down. And I want to make sure that, I know I've got a reflection of this, but I also want to make sure that I have that line as it comes up to the ocean, the base of this rock, rolling my brush in the paint again. It has to flow off of your brush. And if you don't have a nice, soft, absorbent brush, then think about getting one, because it will help you paint without effort. Roll my brush in paint again. The temptation to just keep painting until your brush runs out of paint. Don't do that. So far the tip of this number 8 is doing okay for the edge of the rock, but any minute now I'm probably going to switch to my number 4 to get a little bit more control. Switching now, rolling that number 4 in the paint. I want it as wet as the other brush. And the other thing is, if you use a brush that's too small to do this, you'll have lots of streaks in it. I can use a slightly smaller brush here because I'm going down to a smaller piece of rock. And there's a little bit of rock that juts out that I don't think I put on the drawing because I missed it. I didn't even see it until I drew mine the other day. There's a little tiny bit of rock that juts out there. If you look at your photograph, you'll see it. Now, can you see a brush stroke anywhere in this? No, because the paint is liquid enough. And let me grab a brush that's not as absorbent. So this is a cheap brush, and it's not as absorbent as my Silver Black Velvet. And if I try and paint with this, you are going to see brush strokes. It doesn't hold as much paint, and it will dry as I'm painting. It will dry. And if I keep painting with a dry brush, I'll eventually run out of paint and I'll get streaks. And and if I try and fill it in afterwards, I'm going to start lifting off paint. So it's really, really important. Look at the difference between the two. I can't get it, I need to zoom out a little bit. So this is with a cheap brush and not enough paint on it. And this is with a good brush loaded with wet paint. And it makes a huge difference. And load your brush frequently. Now, I'm going to do this little tiny one here with my number 2 brush. And again, I'm still going to roll my number 2 brush in the paint until it's absolutely loaded. And then I want to do this funny little rock that's here. Again, I've just done that much painting, and I'm going to load the paintbrush again. If you have your paintbrush well loaded and it's a good brush, you can go fairly slowly, loading it again, rolling it again, making sure I get a horizontal base. Water finds the horizontal, so you've got to have horizontals that come up against water. And we've got the little rock in there. I'm not going to do the reflection yet because I do want to have a break between the reflection and the rock, and I don't want one to run into the other accidentally. So I have a few other lines that I can put in. Let me grab my photograph here. Put my brushes somewhere, they're not going to get lost. I think, I don't really know if this is surf along here that just looks dark in the photo. I presume it is because it looks like there's surf coming up here. So it looks like we've got the opposite happening, that it's dark and the rest of the ocean is catching the light. I think it doesn't really matter what it is. We're going to put it in dark just as we see it here and put these lines in. Again, we're going to go right through the surfer's head so that we don't have an awkward break either side of the head. So again, I'm going to use my number 2 brush for now because I want some nice thin lines, and I'm going to have the photograph just in my hand in front of me here, so I'm careful about where I'm putting those lines. I'm going to have to start from over here because I'm right-handed and I don't want to squish my wrist in this. And because my number 2 brush is quite a lot smaller than my big brush, I've got to load it quite often. And it looks like the waves are a little bit broken here, so I can do broken lines as I'm painting. And that's going to be fine. And it slows me down and helps me get everything in the right place rather than swishing a line across there and going in the wrong place too. As you're painting, make sure your wrist is sort of supported and pull your brush along as you paint, so you've got some support and you can keep your line a little bit straighter that way. The bottom of this, whatever it is, wave, is again quite flat and horizontal, but the top is quite jagged, which led me to wonder if it was wave or rock. But I think if there's a surfer there, it must be waves. They're just reflected oddly in the evening light. There's a little space between them. And then there's quite a big space before the foreshore one. I'm going to start in the middle this time because I want to get it sort of accurate for where it is here. I've lost my pencil lines a little bit, so I want to make sure I get this going in about the right place. And they are kind of broken up a little bit here. And the nice thing is with them being dark lines, you can go over them. And because they're waves, I'm pretty sure they're waves, you can break them up a little bit. You don't have to get a perfect wash. Like we wanted a nice flat wash for the rock. These can be broken up. They can be, there's a little bit of a wave here that's kind of on its own, just there. And these ones kind of break up a little bit here too. And of course we have to take them back here, even though we're going to have some dark reflections, because they've got to continue. Especially when we're doing transparent watercolor, so if we do see any, they have to look like they go back here, like they're realistic. Yeah, I'm going to mix up, what I want is a little bit of dark purple, so that some of these little waves in the foreground have a more dark purple look to them rather than a blacky color. I've just mixed up a dark purple, which is not very wet, by the way, and because I want a lot more control with it. And there's some little waves just here I want to put in. And I'm going to dry that brush so it's almost no purple on it. And I'm going to add a little bit of dry brush wave in here. Just scratching it with that slightly dry brush. Now at this point you can decide if you want to do anything to your ocean here on the horizon. I don't think I do. I think I want to keep mine really nice and light, and I can't do anything with the sky because I've got all of the black in now, so I'm done with that. I can't put more in. Once I've got the black and the silhouette, if I wet the sky, I'm just going to get a great big water run, and it will run into the black and I'll get a mess. So what I've got to be happy with whatever I've got there. I could have maybe put a bit more orange along the horizon, but too late because I've put this in, and I just have to go with what I've got. Now I think the trickiest part of this is doing this reflection, because in the photograph, because it's a photograph, it's just very solid, and that's always going to look a bit too solid in a watercolor. So when I did mine, where is it? I made it a bit more wet and wet, a bit more splashy, because I didn't want that really solid look in a watercolor reflection on wet sand. So I think that's why this part's going to probably be the most tricky to do. The surfer, pretty straightforward. I think we're just going to do him last. I asked Denise if she knew who it was, and she said, no, it's just a random surfer that just walked past when she was taking the picture. It was very convenient. I'm just touching up that little bit of surf there. And of course there's other things in the sand. There's like seaweed and stuff. Put those in last. Those are all last minute details. For the reflection, I'm going to be using my number 8 brush for the reflection. And I think what I want to do before I start the reflection, still got quite a lot of dark paint left here, but I don't want to run out halfway through, so I'm going to mix a little bit more while I let you have some painting time if you need some. So I've got a little bit more paint. So I'm going to use my number 8 brush, and for the part of the reflection that comes into the ocean here, I want more of a dry brush look, that kind of look where the dark is just kind of touching the ocean a little bit. So I've got my number 8 brush. I'm going to get the paint on it, and then I'm going to get my towel, and I'm going to dab a lot of the paint off of it. And get my scrap paper and drag it over my scrap paper to get it quite dried off, and then I'm going to drag it in from the edge, and it's quite dark up to about here. And I'm going back and forth now because I want it a little darker over on the edge here. And all of this area is a little bit darker. I'm just taking the tip of the brush, just darkening that up a little bit. I don't want too much, I don't want it too dark, but I wanted to get that kind of skippy look over the paper. Now, loading my brush now, and I'm taking in a little bit more dark from the edge so it blends in. And what I want now is another brush that's dry to blend this in a little bit. So we have a transition between the dark and the not so dark. Just there. I just used a dry brush to do that. So I'm coming out with horizontal brush strokes, being careful with the shape of the reflections. The rock comes down here. I can put the little lines in later. They're not crucial right now. They can come later. Now, it's taking that nicely horizontal out here and bringing that out a bit more and connecting them to some of the waves here. Now I can't wait too long because, like the rock, I have to get this paint on without it drying. I don't want brush strokes showing. I'm going to add a little bit of water because remember I said I want it not quite so solid, so I'm adding just a little bit of water here as I come to the corner, washing my brush, and now all I have now is a wet brush, and I want to take that in and out just here for the moment with a wet brush. Now, wet brush with a little bit of purple on it, and I want to connect. So the wet brush, a little bit of purple on the wet brush, or my violet mix, I'm putting a bit more shadow here and connecting it to that reflection that I've just done. Taking out a few purple wave reflections here. Wet brush again. No paint on my brush now. And softening this edge. Now, because my brush is washed in dirty water, it's washed in, let me show you the colour of my water, purple, black. It's going to have dirty water on it, which is exactly what I want. I've washed it in that dirty water and I've just tapped it on my sponge. Oops, I got a great big blob on my guy. And I'm just using that dirty water to pull those little reflections out. So they'll be really, really subtle along the edge there. And a little bit of that water went back into the colour. That's what I wanted. I didn't want it really, really dense right there. What I do have, what I don't like, is when I don't come right up to the tape. I'm just going to fill that in. Now I'm going to get my little small zero brush and the dark paint, because coming out from these reflections are really dark ripples. So I want to put those ripples in. You need to use the point of a little tiny brush. You could use your liner brushes and put these ripples in. You can probably barely see them. I don't want them to be really thick. I can thicken them up if I find, like, I think some of them are a little thin, so I can thicken it up after I've done them if I want them a little thicker. But start thin, get them in the right place. They don't go out very far. They sort of go out just as far as the big rock reflecting goes. And some of them are thicker in places. And as they come towards us, they get thicker still. So you can push your brush down a little bit and have slightly thicker reflections, and don't have them thick all the way out. I'm having them like a little bit thick, and then I'm trailing my brush off and lifting it so that they become thinner. I've got my picture, my reference picture right in front of me, that I can see what I'm doing and where I should be putting them, and how some of them are much, much thicker. That just little bit of variety, thick and thins, it gives an interest to your painting. It doesn't even matter if it's exactly like the photo, that doesn't matter. Just having that general idea of thicks and thins, broken lines, they kind of break up as they get towards the viewer. A little bit of broken line up here. That's what makes your painting interesting. And zoom out a little bit, don't want to be too close. And also I don't like, this is too severe right here. In the actual photo, it's all kind of broken up with those little wave patterns, so I'm going to do that and have that line less severe right there. And then I can go back here and I can put in a few more waves over the top that I've got lost underneath here. And the little bits of seaweed in the sand, they're kind of fun too. There's a wiggly bit here. There's a clump here. Don't make them too perfect. They're little bits of organic matter that are trapped in the sand here. A couple of little bits here. One here. I don't even know, I can't even find my pencil lines, but I'm kind of looking at my picture and putting them in kind of where I think they should go. A little bit more surf here. And oh, this rock here is making the very palest little reflection here, like a really pale lilac color. So back to my pale sort of lilac, little tiny zero brush, and lines, little horizontal lines. It's a small thing. Probably your viewer may not even notice it, but every little tiny detail helps make your reflections look real, like reflections. I kind of think that it could be a deeper blue behind the surfer here. Do I want to do that or not? Part of me says yes, because it makes him the focal point with that deeper blue behind him. You know what? It's just paper. It's just paper. I'm going to go for it. I'm grabbing some clean water because I don't want dirty blue behind him. And sometimes you just have to be brave, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. Really doesn't. Same thing, I want Phthalo Blue. Getting some more Phthalo Blue. And just around the surfer, I don't want to be so timid. I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to put some darker blue around him. You don't have to do this. I'm not, you know, I'm not worried if I make a mess of it. It doesn't bother me. I'm going to take a wet brush and I'm going to just soften that in a little bit. What I kind of want to do is just draw attention to him by having it slightly bluer close to him. And I think the photo is a little bit more blue close to him. Of course, I'm going to have to make sure this is really, really dry before I do him. Maybe a little bit more blue in the ocean, maybe. And like I said, I'm scared of messing up that line. I'm going to leave that line. Wet, damp brush, just with my damp brush, I'm just easing that all into the composition. While I'm fiddling, I'm going to add a little bit of purple to that blue. And I'm going to add a few more purple, a bit more water with it. You'd be surprised how diluted it needs to be. Look, it's pretty diluted. But I'm going to use that diluted purple, and I'm going to put a few more shadows here in the foreground. Maybe even a bit more purple. I'm being really, really brave now and adding a little bit more purple. Now, you do not have to do what I'm doing. I quite often don't do any complicated stuff with you or scary stuff, but I'm just showing you what I often do when I'm painting and not worrying about teaching. Just go for it and doing something a little bit scary that might not work, but it's just paper. Yeah, just put a bit more colour in there and a bit more blue. Right, let's pull back. And of course we're going to put a shadow under the surfer as well, and a dark shadow. And what I want to do before I put that dark shadow in is again get some of that very watery purple and start the shadow process just under where he's walking, just a little bit. It's not a lot. It's not a, it's not really dark. It's this color, quite diluted. And now I've done all that, I'm going to make sure this is really dry so that where my surfer is not going to bleed with any of that paint, and I'm not going to smudge any. So I'm just going to mute myself while I dry that thoroughly. And my last thing I want to put in is the surfer. Using my little tiny brush, either a 2 or a 0, and I'll zoom in so we can see the surfer. And not only have we got the surfer, when we've done him, we've got the reflection of the surfer in the wet sand too. So we're going to start at the top of his head. I'm going to grab I'm very attached to this 0 brush that I bought, but I think I'll start with my number 2. I don't want to be very careful. I don't want to go over any of the lines. Once I've gone over the lines in this dark paint, it's game over. So let's start at the top of his head. You can't really see any features in the photograph, which is nice because we don't have to try and put any like noses or anything on there. And I'm going very, very carefully with the surfer. And going down. To the surfboard, and I'm going to go to my little tiny 0 brush because he's got a hand coming out here, and again you don't want to make that too big. You can see his thumb sort of sticking out. Right, I've got that in. Now I want to switch to a 4 brush for the surfboard. I want a little bit more paint on my brush, and start at the tip with the tip of a brush. I've got a hair on my brush, let's get that off of there. Start again. And I'm painting in the direction of the surfboard from the tip backwards, loading my brush all the time. Even though it's one big silhouette, you don't sort of want to lose the direction of everything in the shape. Obviously you can't disconnect the body silhouette from the surfboard silhouette. There's a little fin thing coming out there, but there's a little tip of the, where's my picture? I'm looking at the wrong picture. There's something on the top of the surfboard here, and I haven't got it pointy enough at the end. I'm going to go to my zero brush, try and get it a bit more pointy at the end. All right, now the legs, like I said, you don't want these legs to be too fat. Just a little bit of craziness with your brush and they can be too thick. So if anything, go thinner. Now I'm just coming up to the knee. The knee juts out a little bit and then it comes in to the shin. And I've got another leg to do over the top. Come out very carefully to the calf. Be really careful. Use the tip of your tiny brush. Keep the ankle nice and thin. And the heel. And the top of the foot's kind of tilted up as he is walking. And then of course we're going to have some reflection too. And then the other leg. Whoops. Let me get my picture where I can see it. I'm not talking because I know if I say anything, he's going to get a big lump on his leg that shouldn't be there. And I will be sad. I think, whew, I can breathe again. Like I said, start off thinner. I've gone a little thinner than my line here, so I can go back a little bit. I can add a little bit more to his leg, but start off thinner than you need to and don't add too much. Keep it nice and slender. And then we have to work on the reflections because he's kind of just floating in space right now. And reflections, as always, follow the horizontal pattern of the water that's in the sand. So, and they're broken up too. You can see that there's this jagged broken edge to the reflection as the water goes in the ripples of the sand. So we need to, first of all, this foot curls away. He's kind of lifting this foot and it kind of curls away. So we need to get that curl back from the foot. And as you paint the reflections, paint them with horizontal strokes so that you get those jutty out bits. See what I mean? If I paint little horizontal strokes, I'm going to stick to the pattern that I see in his leg, but if I paint with horizontal strokes, it makes it more likely that I'm going to get it correct. And also, you can leave some spaces without paint. Most of it's connected, but if you leave a couple of ripples without paint, it's going to look like a reflection. And go slowly. There is absolutely no need to rush this. It's dry paper, it's a little brush, it's little brush strokes. You don't need to rush, you can take your time, because we've got to get his reflection all the way to the edge of the paper here. And also when you're doing these horizontal strokes, make sure that you connect them. They're not all disconnected. Just some of them are. And of course, the legs get wider towards the top, and then they will connect before you get to your tape or edge of your paper. Hopefully, if you've got your paper in the right place, because it's going to look really weird if you just have these kind of odd reflections disappearing down without some reflection of the body and the surfboard as well. Got the body coming across here, a bit of the surfboard maybe, a bit of the head. And there's a few little rocks and things in the sand here and there. There's a bit of seaweed over here. Kind of important, actually, this little bit of seaweed over here, because, let's pull back, because in this composition you have this mass of dark over here, and then it's continued all the way over to here, and then your dark focal point. This little bit of seaweed over here really just balances. You don't need anything very big for balance. It just needs to be the same value, the same dark value. And that balances everything and points you towards the surfer. I mean, it's miraculous that in that photographic composition everything works really well. This pointing you towards the surfer. The surfer is in the exact position that you would want a focal point on your 1/3 of it. You've got this big dark mass here, but it's balanced with this dark over here. It is a perfectly balanced composition, and I don't think that happens by accident. I think good photographers like Denise, they do that instinctively. Now all I'm putting in now is some extra little ripples and touches, some little rocks in the sand here and there. And I'm glad I made it darker blue around the surfer. Now I have the dark surfer in there. And I think his hand for me is just a little bit. Oh no, see, I did a couple of strokes. I've almost made it too big. It's just a little bit too small for me, for what I think it should be. Just needed a little extra. But there we go. There's some things I would change if I did it again. But all in all, I'm fairly happy with it. It's not as intense as this, and there's no reason you can't go a bit more intense if you wanted to. But I think when you're doing your first one, or your first couple of them, you do want to be a little bit more cautious, and then the third one you do, you can put a little bit more colour in if you feel you want to. I like the soft watercolory look of it when it isn't quite so in your face dark. And I'm just going to take my masking tape off to get rid of that ugly border that nobody wants to see. And it just looks more satisfying to have a clean edge. And then what I usually do with my brown tape is I cut off the edge with a knife. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed that one. That was fun, and I like doing the sunsets. I think I could do another one now and just practice it again. We all need to practice them more than once, I think. So take care, and I'll see you again next week for another lovely sky and silhouette. Bye for now.